Snohomish County, Washington, was pretty cold on January 3rd, 1979. A duck shooter left his house to start his day by trying to catch some good game. He was excited to catch a lot of ducks and fish when he noticed something strange. Something was caught in the net on the mud flats near the shore. He was interested, so he went over to see what was going on. As he looked around, he started to feel scared. It wasn't what he had expected. He had found people's bones. Whose bones were those? What happened to that person? Was it an accident or something much worse? Hi, and welcome back to our channel. If you are new here, please consider subscribing, as it helps us motivate to create more intriguing content for you. Let's have a look at the 44-year-old cold case finally solved in 2023, Gary Lee Haynie's case. Without further ado, let's dive Snohomish County, Washington, into the secret foreign county where people don't walk by each other without saying hello, where the community is full to the brim with friends, or where the country's rich history and culture are woven into every building. Even though Snohomish County is the third most populated county in Washington, it feels like a small town and has a pretty low crime rate. Its beauty is shown by its many beautiful scenery, miles and miles of farmland, and the happy faces of the people who live there and enjoy having comfort and security. When a place is nice, simple, and full of possibilities, like a place where skeletal remains have been found, it's hard to think that a mystery would start here that would take decades to solve. In 1979, Snohomish County residents did not have a good time. It was colder than ice. The temperature and the amount of snowflakes were both the highest ever recorded. There was a cold spell in the whole state of Washington. But January 3rd, 1979, was different from all the other days. When the sun came up the next morning, everyone could finally breathe again. It felt like the temperature was rising above 0 degrees. For the first time in a week, the temperature was above freezing, and people felt safe enough to leave their homes and enjoy the less bitter cold. A duck shooter went out with the same goal in mind, to catch a lot of wild ducks so he could sell them for a lot of money. He got to the mouth of the Snohomish River, which is where two sloughs meet Puget Sound at the western end of North Spencer Island. When he saw something strange, he was mostly thinking about where to find ducks. When he looked at them more closely, he saw that they were human bones. Right away, the police were called. When the police got to the scene near Everett, Washington, they couldn't help but feel a chill. The duck hunter's story was scary because it was so true. A fishing line got 10 pairs of pants, a low leather quarterback shoe, and a piece of a human leg bone, but that wasn't all that was found. During the first investigation, the duck hunter led the officers a little to the west. 5 feet away from a human skull, ribs, and a shoe with a foot still in it, they found a red, orange, white, and gray checkered shirt. It was scary and awful to see. When the cops went back to the scene to look for more clues, they found a leather wallet that had stayed dry in the salty water, but whatever was in it was long gone. There was no driver's license, money, or fishing ticket in it. At the same place, a 33 to 34 size belt was also found. As the cops looked over the evidence, they saw that the shoes found there had laces and had the numbers 30 and 38 on them. But O'Sullivan's name was on the rubber heel of the shoes. On the tag of the green pants, it said that they never need to be ironed and were made in the USA. This seems like an unimportant detail, but it could be the only way to find out who the unknown man is. Even though the case seemed complicated, there was no reason to think that something bad had happened. From what was left of the man without a name, It was hard to tell what had happened to him. When the probe started, the people in charge had a hard job to do. Since the person had been dead for a long time, simple answers weren't likely to be easy to find. They gave the body parts to a doctor so that he or she could find out as much as possible. The doctor told them that the body parts came from a man who had been dead for several months. It didn't make finding the man's name any easier, but at least it was a start. The office of the coroner did all it could to find out who the man was. They said that to find the answers they were looking for, they should keep a record of his teeth and look at his body. But time wore down the records too much to keep them in good condition. In 1979, no matter how hard the police tried, they couldn't figure out who the man was. So, the mystery of this unknown man became a John Doe case when Snohomish County's coroner at the time, Robert Phillips, gave the man the name John Doe 791 and wrote that the cause of death could not be found because there were so few signs. Almost nothing could be done to figure out who the 1979 John Doe was. So, on March 15, 1979, after about 2.5 months of waiting, the unknown man was buried in a nice grave at Everett Cypress Memorial Park. Bone parts are kept in the office of the medical examiner until a family member claims them or they are finally identified. Still, this was not the end of the investigation. They had yet to go a long way. Everyone in the area, including the cops, was looking for hints about who John Doe was. Still, none of the leads led anywhere, so the agents gave up and said the case was over. The case had been over for years, and almost all of the evidence had been lost. But then, something went right. In a strange way, advanced science and tools for law enforcement came together to open up a whole new world of justice. The hard-to-use technology and research methods of the past were no longer a problem. Things are better now than they were back in 1979. In 2008, Jim Scharf, a detective for the sheriff's office, and Ken Cowsert, a former judge from the Superior Court, went through old files that had been sitting around for decades. This is how the John Doe case from 1979 was brought up again, when the case file for John Doe was finally solved in 1979. After all those years, the officers couldn't help but feel frustrated. The information was checked, but it wasn't enough to tell if the original investigation had matched the description of the unknown man with any of the missing people from that time. They were left asking how many tips had been followed up on and how many had been thrown away. It was a wake-up call that the material was lost before it could be converted. But the police would not give up. In 2008, they began to look into it carefully. They looked through old records to see if there was any information that could help them figure out who the dead person was. About 36 years had passed since the man had been found in the mudflats. Even though it was 2015, investigators were still trying to figure out who this man was. At this time, there were a lot of John and Jane Doe cases, so the Snohomish County Police gave John Doe 1979 a new name, Spencer Island John Doe. In July 2015, the police asked the Snohomish County judge if they could dig up John Doe's body on Spencer Island. After asking, they took the body to the office of the medical inspector. There, forensic odontologist Dr. Kyle Tanaka thought that uploading the man's dental records to national databases would put light on a few missing person reports that might be a match, but it didn't work out that way. The case was added to the NAMIS database of missing people in August 2015. Still, there was nothing. In their search for the truth, the spies tried everything they could think of. They looked at his clothes, wallet, and belt that they had found before, and saw that he wore clothes that had been worn before. The Snohomish County sheriffs asked the people who lived there to speak up if they knew anything about the unknown man. Even though finding the person right away was a big goal, the police were almost on the verge of a big break when they got a tip in late 2015. It happened because the cops got an unexpected tip that said Spencer Allen John Doe looked like a farmhand who had gone missing in Marysville. After a long time, a cop got a good-looking tip, so they had to check it out. Everyone in Everett knew that the man who ran a fruit stand was always drunk. People said he limped badly and disappeared in the late 1970s. The tip seemed to be true, and the police were about to figure out what was going on. After a month of hard work as detectives, they were crushed when they found a tombstone in Yuma, Arizona. Using billiongraves.com, they were able to figure out that it belonged to the same farmhand whose tip they had received. In 1981, he died in the southwestern desert area where he was going. After the setback, the officers couldn't help but feel like the case wasn't going anywhere. As people looked for signs at the crime scene, the medical examiner's office made a second set of very important discoveries. They were able to find out important things about the man that helped them definitely identify him. Dr. Kathy Taylor, who works at the King County Medical Examiner's Office in Washington State and is a forensic scientist, looked at his bones after they were found in April 2016. She was able to do this because she had a good eye and years of training in the field. She could guess that he was somewhere between 27 and 61 years old. She thought he was somewhere between 5'1" and 5'7" tall. In his report, the forensic scientist said that the Spencer Island John Doe was either Native American, Caucasian, or a mix of the two. So, when people from the Tulalip and Silagwamis tribes went missing, the cops paid more attention to the stories and sent out alerts. There was too much and not enough material to make a story that made sense. They looked at a lot of information and found that there were no signs of perimortem trauma, which is an injury or trauma that happened right before or right after death. They decided this because there were no new cuts and all of the old ones had been fixed. But when doctors looked at the bones, they saw something terrible. His left thigh bone was badly broken and couldn't be put back together. This made it hard and painful for him to walk. The reports also said that based on what they saw when they looked at John Doe's bones on Spencer Island, he might have had temporomandibular joint disease. The jaw hurts when you have bar joint syndrome, which is a painful condition. His broken femur didn't look like it had ever been handled by a doctor, so he may have been in pain for years without anyone knowing. An X-ray showed that the middle third of bone stuck out like the tip of an ice scraper, and it was clear that he was in constant pain. It's almost as if he was in a third world country or just didn't want to get medical help. Jane Jorgensen, a detective at the medical examiner's office, didn't seem to understand what was going on because there were no answers. Even if the man had been poor when he died, he would have gone to an emergency room to get care right away. He wouldn't have been asked to turn him out or anything. Why would someone go through so much pain if the care was free in the end? On his left leg, he would have been 2 inches shorter. In this case, the leg of John Doe from Spencer Island became another puzzle. As the probe went on, more disturbing facts came to light. The study of his remains that were dug up showed that he was missing 2 upper left front teeth and 2 back teeth. The holes had healed well, which showed that he had lost them before he died. People thought that he had access to medical care because he had a space in his teeth and had metal fillings in 3 of them. The officers were left with more questions than answers about how he lived and how he died. If he could get his teeth fixed, why would he wait to get urgent care for his leg? The detectives didn't know what to do. But they soon realized that he would have gone to the dentist when he was a kid or teen and still living with his parents. As he got older, he might not have gone to the doctor when he needed to. What made him put up with the pain and lack of care in his later years was still a question. Officers were shocked when they found out that inmates could get free dental care. So, Spencer Allen John Doe might have been locked up before, but the question didn't make a lot of sense and seemed a bit strange. If that had been the case, someone would have remembered him by now because he walked with a limp, smiled with a gap, and had broken teeth. The whole case was based on theories, and the police knew that even the smallest facts could be the key to finding out what really happened. Jorgensen and Sharp got together with a retired judge, Kenneth Cowsert, and a retired parole supervisor, Chuck Wright, at the sheriff's office to talk about possible options. Given the state of his body, it was getting harder and harder to figure out what killed him. There were many different ideas. They thought that when he got hurt, he might not have been able to see a doctor, but this seemed more like a desperate guess than a good idea. They thought the man without a name was a fisherman. It could explain how he hurt himself and why he might not have gotten help. It could even mean that he died on the boat and washed up on beach by chance. He might have been buried at sea by other sailors. Over time and through erosion, his body might have been carried down the river to where Steamboat and Union sloughs meet and ended up in the tide flats west of the railroad bridge on State Road 529. Snohomish County sheriffs thought it was possible that he fell overboard and killed by accident. Around the place where the body was found in the mud, the detectives had followed every hint and talked to every possible witness. They kept running into dead ends, but they didn't give up. In a last-ditch effort to figure out what was going on, they turned to forensic art. In April 2016, forensic artist Natalie Murray put his face back together by gluing rubber pegs to his old head and figuring out what he might have looked like when he was alive. Natalie saw that his lips were flat and that his nose was small. These traits were similar to those of people with Asian roots, but the bones had worn down over time, so it was hard to prove this idea with the facts. She didn't give up, so she extrapolated his lower jaw and made up other traits because she had nothing better to do. Using her knowledge, she made a picture that she hoped would help solve the case. Dr. Kathy Taylor, a forensic scientist, looked at the sketch and confirmed that it looked like it was made by someone who was half Native American and half Caucasian, which was what was needed. In 2018, a piece of the right leg was sent to a national database at the University of North Texas, where the DNA was taken and used to update the FBI's CODIS database. With the help of enhanced DNA, the EMT DNA and STR profiles were made and were ready by March 2019. A former police officer said that he saw a guy with a noticeable limp who looked like the sketch in the 1970s. In 2021, a private Texas company called Othram Labs got another piece of John Doe's femur from Spencer Island. This project was paid for by DNASoms.com, an advocacy group that supports and funds DNA testing to help investigators and families find answers they've been looking for years or even decades. With Adam Wilcoxon's help as a death investigator, the cops were getting closer to finding one name. They worked hard and hoped for about 3 hours before they found Gary Lee Haynie. They looked at the family tree and got in touch with his surviving half-sister, whose DNA matched that of his biological half-brothers. After 44 years, on February 10th, Snohomish County medical examiner Dr. Matt Lacey figured out that Spencer Island John Doe was actually Gary Lee. Bernice Helen Schaefer, who was 28, and Joseph Dominique Contamiti, who was 37, had a boy on September 23, 1950. He was born in Topeka, Kansas. Gary Joseph Contamedi was his name. Gary's parents split up a few months later, and his life was about to take some big changes. Gary's mother married a soldier named Sheldon Lee Haynie around 1955. Sheldon took Gary in as his own son and gave him the name Gary Lee Haynie. Gary's step-cousin Hall, who is now 71 years old, said there was something wrong with his brain that made people take notice. Sheldon, Gary's stepfather, got out of the military and went to work for Boeing in the Air Force. He moved his family many times from New York to Kansas. When everyone got together for the holidays, Haynie couldn't come because they lived too far away. In fact, Gary just stopped showing up in family pictures as he got older. Gary's father died at the Missouri Veterans Hospital when Gary was 16 years old. Gary's mother died when he was 3 years old, so his dad, Sheldon, raised him. Gary was officially declared dead on the day before Christmas in 1976. His Social Security records showed that he was living in some kind of rooming house. Gary's family was upset by his sudden death, even though they didn't get to see him very often, because the Haynie family moved all the time. Hal Haynie, Gary's step-cousin, only met Gary twice in his life. But Hal had been putting together family history on an ancestry website for a long time, so he knew a lot about Gary's life as a kid and an adult that he could share. Gary's life seemed to have been a secret from the beginning. In fact, he was officially declared dead in 1976, which was about 3 years before he was found on Spencer Island. He had been dead for months, according to the autopsy report. But 3 years is a long time, especially since Gary seemed to have vanished. During those 3 years, no one knew where he went or how he died. Hal thought that something might have happened between them and that Gary might have been kicked out or left alone. Gary's cousin, Hale, said he thought Gary could have died from a number of things, like drowning, hitting his head on a rock, or having a medical problem. Now, detectives think that Gary lived with his stepfather in Everett because Sheldon stayed there from the 1970 until 1990. Because of how he lived after he retired, people called Sheldon a snowbird. He used to live in Baja, California, which is in Mexico, during the winter months. In the middle of the 1980, Sheldon drove to Texas to see his nephew Thane. But Gary had nothing to do with what they were talking about. Hal said that he had never talked to him about Gary. Just never happened. Sheldon Haynie lived in Oregon before he died in 1997. When it was found out that Sheldon never reported Gary missing, it led to more than just doubts. It made a lot of new questions and options possible. Why wouldn't someone report their lost son? Did Sheldon have something to do with Gary going missing? Or was something else going on? As the probe went on, the detectives started to find a web of long-kept secrets and lies. They found out that Gary's life had not been easy at all. It had been full of sadness, loss, and hard times. Hale put out a quarterly magazine with the help of his cousins, who were living in Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah, even though they didn't talk often. He said, "When I thought about Gary, I felt pulled to do something about his grave." The family had moved all the way across the country, so even if it was scary to visit Gary's grave, it would give him peace after 44 years of not having a name, no family, and being alone. Even though his name was found after 40 years, Gary Lee Haynie was still a riddle, just as he was when his body was found in 1979, or when he was younger and his family didn't know anything about him. When Gary's name was found out, it opened a box of new questions, like Pandora's box, and sent investigators down a rabbit hole of confusion and uncertainty. Even though they had learned more about his past, they still didn't know much about his last days. As the news of Gary's identity spread, there was a growing sense of hope that someone out there might have the missing piece of the puzzle, that crucial bit of information that could shed light on his mysterious disappearance and tragic death. How do you think Gary Lee Haynie's life turned out? What do you think is the most likely reason for his broken leg bone? Use the comments to tell us what you think. Like, write, and subscribe if you want to see more. Stay safe until the next time, and thanks for watching.